Something like the Olympics has a very good standard on trans people competing. I'm okay with it. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, our life is about compromises. Just because I have a particular frame of thought doesn't mean that I'm inherently correct. Their perspective is, when it comes to trans men cannot be on HRT in order to compete because that would put them on steroids, right? Basically. All right. When it comes to trans women, they have to have been on HRT for like, I think 2 years, and their testosterone levels have to fall below a certain amount in their system. All right. So these are very reasonable things. Okay. I'm fine with them. Right. That's on the Olympic level. A lot of other sports have adopted this. The problem is that you can't really apply that to high school sports. It becomes very difficult. One of the reasons. Anyway, Joe Biden is president now. What has it been, like 4 days? He's already doing terrible things, okay? He's already putting us back into the Paris Climate Accord. He's taking measures to counter the coronavirus. Worst of all, he's protecting trans people. I'm just upset. Can't believe it, Joe. Can't believe that you don't hate trans people. No. All jokes aside, he's been in there. He hasn't really done anything too much notable. I know there was like a whole Keystone pipeline. Realistically speaking, the perspective is people, we need to leverage the health of our world and our environment versus money. That's a whole other topic for another day. But the trans protections that Joe Biden announced are very important, and they are very positive, but there is a potential negative drawback here, and we have to talk about it, right? So basically, I'm only bringing up this article because there's a specific thing that he said. Apparently you have to whatever. But he mentioned something to the, basically what Joe Biden wants to do is he wants to extend protections for trans people, specifically extend from just like protections based on sex to protections based on gender. Now, I think that's a generally positive thing overall. Trans people are people. They obviously deserve rights. And you shouldn't lose job opportunities or be denied schooling in any capacity just because you're trans. It'd be silly. However, what we need to understand and acknowledge is that when it comes to trans people, right? Okay, there are a few situations where the sex of a trans person does matter. Okay, trans people, and this is for context. Hopefully, maybe this vague or maybe this generalized, like my generalized view on trans people, will help you guys out. Trans women are women, and trans men are men, right? Just like cis women are women and cis men are men. Right? They are equal, but they're not the same, right? They deserve equal rights, but trans women and cis women, they're not the same, right? The biology is still a factor. Whether that factor is displayed literally and logically in some kind of gender expression aspect, or even if it's just kind of some kind of like mental aspect when it comes to like someone else's perception of a trans person. A lot of people that are even accepting of trans people don't look at trans people 100% for their gender, right? This comes into a very deep conversation about trans, gender identity, gender expression. It gets very complicated, but we're not really going to get into that. Okay. The reason I say this is because there is a specific area where the sex of a trans person does matter, right? For the most part, there's 3 areas to me where the sex of a trans person matters. When it comes to their doctor, so they can get accurate treatment. When it comes to physical and sexual relationships, so that somebody that they're interacting with understands their biology and their sex, whether that's some kind of like literal aspect of like, their penis or their inability to have children in a traditional sense, or even some people just look at trans people in a different way. There's a mental fragility aspect. And the way I usually try to define it is this, if you wouldn't date a trans person because they're trans, I wouldn't say that's transphobic. What I would say more than anything else is that you, to an extent, are perceiving a trans person for their biology to some degree, and that's off-putting to you. Now, that's unfortunate for trans people. It's terrible that we live in a society that's unfair, but that's life. And realistically speaking, you cannot put the mental perception of a trans person of themselves above the perception of other people. We can't put that over them, right? I know that was very inconcise. What I'm saying is that the view of a trans person of themselves is not greater than the view of someone else perceiving them when it comes to a direct relationship, right? Everybody's 50-50, and we shouldn't be forcing people who are uncomfortable with trans people to engage. Now, that's from an individual perspective. From a societal perspective, we should accept trans women and trans men as women and men, right? Sweeping legislation to protect their constitutional rights, their civil rights, I think we should go as far as to have insurance companies cover, therapy, hormones, and even surgeries, as long as the doctor, says that it's necessary. But again, individually, people have their own perspectives of each other, and as long as you're courteous to a trans person and you accept them in society, you're able to just not want to date somebody who's trans, right? That being said, the third thing, which is what the actual theme of this video is sports. It's very relevant. Okay? Generally speaking, sports in and of themselves are primitive. They are solely like biologically based things, right? You try to get the best biological person for a particular sport. You want to see who the best person is based on their biology, based on like a primitive thing. Nowadays you would say like soccer is the equivalent to like a gladiator stadium hundreds of years ago. You just want to see the best person in a particular field excel. Now, this is the reality, but when it comes to any sport, the best man is always going to be better than the best woman, except for maybe like video games. I don't really know, but you get what I'm saying when it comes to physical contact sports, right? So because of that, we have created a space for women so that they can thrive as well. That's the whole point, right? So that they have the ability to compete against each other without somebody who like literally can't fail going against them, right? You look at this in any sport. Like it's crazy. It's, men are just physically superior to women. And I know that sounds antagonistic for some women. I don't think that men are better than women, but men are better than women at sports. Then you can make the argument, hey, sports was made for men. That's why men are better at it. Okay, sure. Maybe you got a good point. Maybe we should make some female-specific sports. I don't know. But generally speaking, also, men are the ones who consume sports. Women don't even like sports, let's be honest here. Anyway, let's get into this. So, with this whole situation, the language it was specifically referencing schooling, and it opens up a conversation and the potential for trans people in high school and middle school and below sports competing based on their gender identity instead of their sex. Now, right now, me personally, hot take, I don't really think trans people should be competing in sports in general. I think it's a very complicated conversation, and you're better off making it so trans people can't compete. However, my individual perspective doesn't trump the perspective of society. Something like the Olympics has a very good standard on trans people competing. I'm okay with it. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, our life is about compromises. Just because I have a particular frame of thought doesn't mean that I'm inherently correct. Their perspective is, when it comes to trans men cannot be on HRT in order to compete because that would put them on steroids, right? Basically. All right. When it comes to trans women, they have to have been on HRT for I think 2 years, and their testosterone levels have to fall below a certain amount in their system. All right. So these are very reasonable things. Okay. I'm fine with them. Right. That's on the Olympic level. A lot of other sports have adopted this. The problem is that you can't really apply that to high school sports. It becomes very difficult. One of the reasons is because, first and foremost, I don't really think that anybody under the age of 18 should even be on hormones in general. I think that, maybe when you're 16, you can get diagnosed and you can go to therapy and whatnot, but I don't think you should be taking any hormones until you're 18, at least 18 years old. So we've completely knocked out high school. It's just the whole, you can't do it. So since you can't have a trans woman, right, which is a gender woman, biological male, since you can't have that individual on HRT before the age of 18, at least that's my belief. And I think it's actually in practice. I don't think you can. Maybe 16. I think it's 18. It might be 16. Either way, I think it makes it very difficult to apply that, because now we have a conversation. It's okay, so if I'm a biological man and I am taking no hormones, I have all of the genetic, predispositions. I'm still genetically stronger. It is, not to be transphobic, basically a male is competing with women. All right. If you're not on HRT and you have no other thing, that's basically what it's about. Okay. And men are inherently superior physically to women in sports. So what it's going to do is it's going to create a space, right, that's going to push trans women, or cisgendered women out of the competition. That's what it's going to do. This is what I would say is the point where we talk about societal acceptance versus societal pandering. It's accepting to accept trans people, but not at the expense of other people. So including trans women in sports removes cisgendered women from sports. Trans women are always going to compete at a higher level. They're biological men. Even honestly, with somebody on HRT, they still have a physical advantage. If you went through male puberty, especially playing a particular sport, you've developed in a way that's going to make you physically superior, even if you're on steroids or even if you're on HRT. Now, some people will say, well, how come trans people aren't dominating the Olympics? Honestly, you want to know the real reason? Is because the limitations in the Olympics are so like specific and strenuous that it makes it difficult for trans women to compete, because it makes it difficult for trans people to actually go on steroids. I know that sounds weird, but like at top tier competition level, everyone's on performance enhancing drugs. And like as a cis woman, you can get around it by like getting a doctor's note, some bullshit. Like it's really easy. You watch Bigger, Stronger, Faster. It's a really good documentary. But when it comes to like trans people, obviously you can't, because there's a limitation on your testosterone, right? So there you go. That's why I don't think it's a good thing to happen. I understand it's upsetting. I know a lot of people, trans people, might be upset about this. I don't say this as an antagonistic point. I say this as a purely logical perspective. I don't think that trans people should just generally compete with cis people in really any capacity. I know it's unfortunate. I understand that kids should still be able to compete in sports, and that removing that outlet for young trans people could be very damaging. But if that's the case, you have them compete in casual sports, or even honestly, have a young trans kid that's not going on HRT compete with men. I'm not trying to be rude. Life's not perfect, and life's not perfectly fair. Okay. It's just, that's just it. Like, I think that we try so hard to make everything perfectly fair, and it's just not going to happen. So here you go. What do I think about the trans army ban lift? Bro, whatever the military thinks is best is whatever I care about. My understanding is that like military officers don't give a shit about trans people compete. Like, they're fine with trans people serving. And if a trans person wants to put their life on their line for me, who the fuck am I? I don't give a shit. I think the argument was like, oh, well, the government shouldn't have to pay for trans therapy or whatever. Like, oh, you should have to come in fully transitioned because we don't want to have to pay for. Go fuck yourself. Okay, maybe there's an argument there when it comes to like the mental stability, but I imagine that you go through a psychiatric evaluation when you go into there. So to assume that all trans people are unfit for the military service based on that, when you have to go through a psychiatric evaluation anyway, well, that's stupid. Okay, they're people, then come in, they can get evaluated, and if their evaluation comes back that they can serve in the military, then why am I involved? Why would I be like, no, don't let it happen? You see what I'm saying? And if they want to have their whatever covered, I already told you guys, I'm 100% for like forced insurance, the companies like forcefully, or I'm already in favor of insurance companies having to cover these things. So why would I say that's a negative? Like, trans people should have their therapy, hormones, and surgeries covered. I just think that's the way it is. Yeah. So, do you think that for sports, military, etc., they should use bio? I don't really care. I don't care. There's no level of competition in the military. There's just like your ability to perform. So if we've set the bar lower for women, and we decide to set the bar lower for trans women too, I don't care. It's so irrelevant to me. Like, there's like such a small percentage of people who even see combat in the military. I think it's like 1%. I don't know. Maybe it's 10%. Barely anybody even gets put overseas. Like, they're never even going to see combat. Like, the overwhelming majority of roles in the military, I would say, it's like so irrelevant. Like, yeah, you can make an argument when it comes to like battle situations where you're like actually in combat, where men are going to perform better than women. They can carry heavier loads and drag their partner out. There is an argument to be made about, like, just when it comes to men and women, not even trans women, that men are more conditioned to like put their lives in line for women and try to protect their partner at like any cost. There's like I guess you'd call that implicit bias, which can be very like, it can be damaging for a mission. But like, simply put, it's a military's decision. Whatever, even reaction times, men have better reaction times. That actually might be an upbringing thing more than anything else. I don't really know. But if the military says that it's fine and they're acceptable soldiers, who the hell am I? You know what I'm saying? Like, there's just some things where we need to understand. Like, if you're a conservative who goes, hey, listen, like, and this was a big talking point. Hey, people at the border were saying they need more funding to protect the border. So if you're somebody who thinks that the person whose job it is should be the one who tells you what they need, then if the military is telling me that trans people are fine, then I don't really need to have an argument. I don't need a perspective on it, because I'm going to leave it to the professionals as to what they think is best that we do. You understand what I'm saying? So, yeah.
I want Papa God to pee on my face, but just as a friend. There's nothing weird about that. I want him to pee on my face.